Chapter 38, The Pantheon Reunited. Our return to Orzammar was met with joy and anticipation. The mood of the city was excited curiosity. The citizens were happy to have us home and were wondering if we'd been successful in achieving the goal we'd set out to accomplish. We spent the first 2 days after our arrival secluded in House Orodum. Farron familiarized himself with new recruits and how training had been coming along. I went over the finances, assembly proposals, and setting up meetings with people who had asked for them upon my return. It took me 2 days because of all the meeting requests. Essentially, every noble house and many of the top surface caste families had requested meetings. So had a number of warrior caste and artisan caste families. It took me a great deal of consideration and schedule balancing to get everything set up. On the 3rd day after our return, I went to the palace to visit Father. However, since Father was sitting in with the assembly, it became an opportunity to announce my success. As I waited for the assembly to call for me, Trian arrived in the waiting chamber. "Merida!" Trian exclaimed. He approached me and hugged me close. "It's good to see you again. I trust your travels were successful?" I returned the hug happily. They were, far more than I expected. You should sit in on the explanation. I think you'll approve. Of that, I have no doubt, Trian chuckled. If things went better than you expected, then I'll have to listen in. I assume you've been getting a deluge of requests to meet with you? I nodded and sighed. Basically, anyone and everyone you can think of. You need to delay those meetings, Trian insisted. They're just trying to get some minor prestige of being able to say they met with you recently after you've been crowned. Either that, or they're trying to get some kind of agreement from you that they can call in after you become Empress. Make them wait. Make the meeting something they should thank you for. Once you have that title, no one will be able to hold any kind of sway over you, promise, contract, or otherwise. I stared at Trian for a moment, considering what he'd said carefully. It was true that the majority of those who'd requested a meeting would likely try and do something for me, hoping I would owe them something later, or be grateful and show them favor. I may be loved by my people, but that didn't stop their ambition. The nobles would always vie for power, and merchants would always try to make more money. They would use almost any method to put their families at an advantage over others. That was something I would need to work on after I took the throne. Our society needed to emphasize excelling at what we were good at, to lift each other up, not excelling at the cost of others. I gave Trian a firm nod. I think that's wise advice. Thank you, Trian. Trian smirked smugly, and here you were wanting to be my advisor. It seems I'm better suited for that role than you are. I crossed my arms and glared at him in irritation. Don't you even start. This is all your fault, you know. Trian laughed. Only you, sister, would complain about becoming the Empress. I'll have you know I'd give it all up if I could just enjoy traveling like I had been, I sighed. I know you would, Trian nodded. But sadly, that was never your fate. You're simply too good at rallying the people. I know you don't want to hear it, but you brought this on yourself. Just as I was about to respond, a guard from the assembly chamber called out for me. Looks like it's time, Trian smiled. After you, sister. Trian followed me into the chamber as the guard announced us. I took my place at the center of the chamber while Trian moved to stand beside Father. Father was the one to address me. Daughter, it does us all good to see you home and safe once more. I hope you were successful in your ventures. I lowered myself into a curtsy before Father. I'm happy to be home. I am also very happy to say that I was more successful than I had hoped. Please, Father motioned towards me, tell us how things went. I stood proudly and addressed the assembly. First, I would like to say that I was successful in my original goal, which was to find and kill the last 2 remaining old gods. The threat of the blights is forever a thing of the past. In time, with great diligence, even the darkspawn will disappear from our world. There was a cheer of approval. Several of the Deshers even cried with relief. Also, I continued, while killing one of the old gods, I battled one of the Darkspawn's most powerful leaders and killed it. Apart from the Alphas, we have only one great enemy left. The Desher's approval only grew with that news. I rested my hands behind my back. While hunting the last old god, we went to Kal Shirak. I am pleased to say that their assembly has agreed with this body. They have accepted me as their empress and to fully rejoin the empire. Our people will have to look at our traditions and how we approach them going forward. But this will only serve to expand our territory and bring us together. We will be one empire once again. The cheers were replaced with murmured approval. Kal Shirak was always going to be a difficult hurdle to overcome, and many Deshers had voiced concerns that we might have to force them to join us. This was welcome news. Understand that the dwarves of Kal Shirak had to take drastic measures to survive this long, I said quickly. We should not hold this against them. And during my time there, I came to realize that a few of their methods may be worth adopting, and I will consider them over time. In the end, whatever helps to unite the empire will only make us stronger. The Deshers were curious, but nodding in agreement. I'm sure they were wondering what methods I was considering. Finally, I began creating a small navy for us, I smiled. I've bought 12 ships, all with active crews, and contracted an admiral to oversee them for us. For now, the fleet will take jobs according to the admiral's desire, while also shipping goods from Amaranthine to Kirkwall and Valroyo. In time, I will have the ships focus on shipping from Guarin as well. Eventually, as more ships are added, our ability to ship goods will only grow, and our ability to project our power over the water will make us indispensable to our allies of Ferelden. The chamber buzzed with approval. They could see that their future empress was already making moves to grow and secure the empire. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive, and I could hear the occasional suggestion that they move the timeline of my coronation up. I believe I speak for the whole of the assembly that we could not have asked for a greater return, Father said as he clapped. You have defeated our enemies, secured our alliance with Kal Shirak, and extended our military might in only the span of a few months. The assembly has made the right decision to name you empress. However, that point must be addressed. We need to decide on the date of your coronation. I have no doubt that the assembly has considered a great many dates for my coronation, I replied. However, I refuse to take the throne before I am married. I will have Farron standing beside me as my husband when I first wear the crown. To that end, there can be no greater first service for my husband than to escort me to my throne. In that respect, I propose we hold my wedding and my coronation on the same day. I will be married first, then Farron will walk me to the coronation. Would this please the assembly? This suggestion seemed to excite the assembly. A wedding and a coronation on the same day? They could see the potential in it. The day would raise spirits all over the empire and would essentially become a holiday. The day the empire officially returned, and the day the empress was wed to a hero of the empire. This idea quickly gained approval. I will turn 25 in 3 months, I added. If the assembly approves, I would like to schedule everything for that day. What better gift can my people offer me than a husband and an empire? That got everyone's attention, and the excitement in the chamber was electrifying. They could truly turn the day into one that the people would celebrate. My birthday was already celebrated throughout Dwarven society, so adding my wedding and coronation to it would turn it into a celebration on a completely different level. I left the chamber with the assembly's approval while they began planning the events to come. Farron was waiting for me in the large hall outside of the assembly chamber. His expression lightened when he saw me, but I could tell he had news for me. I approached him with a smile. Something's got you bothered. What is it? Farron motioned toward the entrance. You have a guest back at the house. A guest? I asked. That's rather vague of you. Who is it? He shook his head as if to suggest he shouldn't say where ears might hear him. She said she needs to speak with you and that she has gifts for you. I arched my brows and shrugged. Very well, take me home then. As we walked home, flanked by my guards, Farin was unusually quiet. Normally, we would talk about the meeting with the assembly. He would even interact with the public as they called to us, but not this time. Even as I greeted those who called out to me, received gifts that citizens offered and accepted people's encouragement for my upcoming coronation, Farin just kept to himself. I didn't let it show as we made our way through the Diamond District, but his attitude had me on edge. When we arrived back at the estate, the guards had already begun to heavily patrol the grounds. I had to wonder who the guest could be to get Farin to react like this. We entered the house and Farin led me to the study. He opened the door and whispered, "She seems too excited." Farin shut the door behind me, and from behind one of the bookshelves I heard, "Enchantment?" "Sandal?" I called. "Soon, my boy, soon," an aged, raspy female's voice responded. "Come, let us say hello to our guest." I knew that voice. I hadn't heard it in years, though. Sure enough, Flemeth stepped out from behind the bookshelf with Sandal in tow. I put on a smile and bowed my head. "Flemeth, it's been some time since we've seen each other. To what do I owe the honor of your visit?" Flemeth chuckled. "As polite as always, princess. Or should I, empress, so the rumors say." I could only shrug in acceptance before moving to the chair in front of the fireplace. "My people have made their decision. I can only bow to their will. Would you care to sit?" Flemeth's eyes narrowed in amusement as she took a seat. "So dutiful as always. Sandal boy, come here and sit with us." "Enchantment." Sandal smiled and sat down on a cushioned footstool. "Farin said you want to speak with me," I began politely. "He also suggested you had some gifts for me." Flemeth nodded and grinned. "Correct on both accounts, my dear. You see, I have felt what has occurred in the past few months. The remainder of my kin are no more. And now that we are together, I understand why. I can sense their power in you. I can feel it beginning to swell up inside of you." I felt a twinge of guilt at the reality of her words. She was the last remaining Evanuris in the world, but she wasn't a threat. She actively fought against the blight. I took a deep breath and nodded. It's true. I took the time to hunt the remaining old gods and slew them before they could become a threat. And you absorbed their souls in the process, Flemeth finished my admission for me. I nodded again. I did, and I've even spoken with them in my dreams somehow. Only once. They said it was my subconscious calling them together to get a better hold on their power. "Then it is true," Flemeth smiled. This time the smile didn't seem cunning or predatory, but sad, and perhaps with a hint of resignation. "You house them all, and June's presence is now but a shadow. I assume this is because her power is slowly fusing with your own." "It is," I confirmed, "but the process seems to be speeding up. I believe this is the result of Falandin's influence. Their essences are fusing with me faster. I can notice it in the steady elevation of my powers. My influence is expanding further and fast than it has before. My magic is more substantial, where even my most basic of spells contain more raw power in them than most powerful spells did only a few years ago. I'm also beginning to show new abilities based on the premier domains that each of the Evanuris were known for." Flemeth silently considered what I had said. Her smile seemed to contain a warmth reserved for someone who was finally understanding something in its purest, most emphatic sense. She gave me a gentle look. "That's good to know, and it makes me happy to hear, truly." I folded my hand in my lap and sighed. "Well, I'm glad it makes you feel better, at least. I'm still not sure what to make of it all." "I don't think you have anything to be concerned over, my dear," Flemeth chuckled. "You are special and are becoming a being of power cultivated over millennia. What's more, you are a good person. your heart is in the right place. You will make a fine leader, not just for your people, but for the rest of the world as well. And that settles the debate I've been having with myself since we last met. A debate? I asked. That sounds rather ominous. May I ask what the debate was and what conclusion you came to? Flemeth hummed to herself. I had to ask myself if I was doing the best I could for the world. After so long, what had I really managed to accomplish? I couldn't stop the blights. I couldn't rally the people. I became feared because of my magic, turned into a myth with sinister connotations. Was I really doing what I needed to do to guard the world? I couldn't even bring myself to hunt and kill my kin to stop the darkspawn from claiming them. She shook her head. The conclusion I came to was that I was being selfish. I was safeguarding myself and the secrets of my people who were lost long ago. I accepted the fact that I wasn't working for the benefit of the world, but for the memory of a world that could no longer be... should no longer be. In short, Princess, I have concluded that I am no longer needed, at least not in the form I currently hold. Her answer surprised me, and I couldn't help but wonder, what do you mean by not in the form you currently hold? Within you are the souls of nearly all of the Evanuris, Flemeth explained, before you sit the remaining members. I believe we should join the others and give you our strength as well. My eyes widened in shock as I realized what Flemeth was proposing. But that would mean the two of you would have to die. I can't be responsible for your deaths, especially not Sandal. He's innocent. How could I accept his sacrifice just to gain more power? Flemeth laughed. Oh, my dear girl, Sandal does not have to die. His soul and Zazakal's have been bound for only a few decades. I admit, I had no idea how to pull them apart at first, but while I was having my debate, I searched the world for the magic that would allow me to separate the two. I am only here because I am confident in my ability to do just that. But what about you? I asked. You'll die. I have transferred my soul many times, child, Flemeth nodded. This will be the final time. You have nothing to fear. I will fade into you just as the others are already doing. But yes, in this process, I will die. And the world will be better for it, because you will use my power better than I have. I looked at Sandal. But what will happen to Sandal once he's separated from Zazikel? Enchantment? Sandal asked as we looked at him. Flemeth reached out and stroked Sandal's hair. I imagine, with his mind free, he will begin to mature and develop as he should have. Something I'd wager his father and friends would love to see. I looked between the two and smiled at Sandal. That would be wonderful indeed. Sandal deserves that sort of freedom. I think so too, Flemeth agreed. Now, are you ready, Princess? I looked at her in surprise. You want to do it now? Flemeth grinned. No time like the present, Princess. And delaying things won't help. I'll separate Zazakel from Sandal first and take her soul into myself. Then, if you please, I'd like to send Sandal out before you finish the work. I nodded softly. I think that would be best. Flemeth nodded in agreement, then shifted in her seat to take Sandal's hand. Well, my lad, are you ready to finally be free? Enchantment? Sandal asked. Flemeth chuckled. Just so. She closed her eyes, and a soft, violet haze began to encompass Sandal. After several moments, a bright blue shade began to appear. The haze were mixed and churned together, but began to slowly sort themselves, with each color congealing on opposite sides of the dwarf. The colors separated with a muted pop. The blue fused back into Sandal, while the violet seeped into Flemeth. After several moments, Sandal looked around. Enchantment? His tone was surprising. While it was still high-pitched and innocent, it held a genuine spark of confusion and slight maturity, like a child who was learning the truth of responsibility. Sandal? I asked with anticipation. He looked at me and smiled. Enchantment. He was responding properly. Or, at least as properly as he could, considering his mind had only just been freed a few moments ago. Still, it was a promising first step. I smiled and stood from my seat. Come, Sandal. I escorted him to the door of the study and instructed Farron to bring him to the dining room so he could have some cake. By the time I closed the door and turned around, Flemeth was standing and waiting for me. "Are you ready, Princess?" Flemeth asked gently. "I think I should be the one asking you that," I replied as I approached her. I looked up at the old woman. "After all, you're the one who's giving up their life for this." Flemeth scoffed. "Nonsense. I have lived my life. It is you who is giving up your life to serve your people. I'm simply happy to lend you my strength for the times to come." I held my hands out to her. "I suppose you've made up your mind, so there's no point in asking if you're sure? I can take care of this next part. So, whenever you're ready, just take my hands." Flemeth smiled. For once, it was a genuine, grateful smile. There was no arrogance or pride, no slyness or predation. She was simply happy. She reached up and placed her hands in mine. "Thank for this, Merida. I can never truly repay you." I tugged at her with my will gently. That's all it took. She was ready and willing, and her soul slipped away from her as easily as if she had handed me a silk cloth. As her soul was absorbed into me, Flemeth's body began to slump to the floor. I caught it quickly and helped to ease it into the chair she'd been sitting in. There was an ache, and a sudden weariness set in. It was like a heavy blanket being pulled over me. I swayed and managed to get to my chair only just in time as darkness overtook me. In one moment, I was trying to settle into my chair. In the next moment, I was standing before the pool in the old ruins once again. June was still kneeling beside the pool, but she was a shade, barely visible at all. Solace and Phelan Din were standing on either side of the pool. Solace was beginning to fade as well. Another elf that looked suspiciously similar to Phelan Din approached the pool. His hair was shorter, and his eyes were more vibrant than Phelan Din's. This had to be Dirthamen. Two other elves, both females, appeared soon after. One had white braided hair that reached down to her ankles, and yellow eyes that were sly and full of mischief. The other had shoulder-length hair the color of a wheat field, and sharp green eyes that looked like they could see everything happening in the area. Mythal and Andril. I smiled brightly. "Flemeth." She smiled and bowed her head. "Please, Merida, call me Mythal. I am myself again." I nodded. "As you wish, but I don't know how this happened. The only time I've met with the Evanurus before was when I was sleeping. Did taking the two of you into me cause me that much fatigue?" Andril laughed. "She really doesn't know anything, does she?" "And how could she?" Solace asked. "It's not as if she's ever truly experienced a gathering like we have. She's only ever called on us once before." "Perhaps you would like to explain things?" Andril snorted. "If I must." She glared at me. "Whenever you call on us like this is something we used to call Pantheon. I assume you did it by accident this time, and probably the first time as well. In our height of power, any of us could use this ability to call a meeting with the rest of those of us who were connected to each other. While our minds and bodies could still operate normally, our spirits would join together like this and speak. When our spirits returned to our bodies, we would have all of the memories of the meeting as if we'd been there ourselves. I thought over the explanation, but if all of you are within me, what happens when this ends? "We sleep," Phelan Din responded, "and fade. As we sleep, our powers are added to yours. It seems to work regardless of whatever world the person is from as well," Mythal surmised. "Most of the Evanurus were originally part of the original world, and were brought into you after Fenharel broke the work in two. Once you are connected with someone on this level, you seem capable of calling them into the Pantheon at will. Or, at least, whenever you sleep for now. You'll master the ability in due time, Solace smiled. Of that, I have no doubt. Why didn't any of you tell me this the first time? I asked, looking at Solace and Phelan Din. You did not ask what it was, Phelan Din responded. You asked how it happened. With that question, I assumed you knew what it was and simply didn't know how you accomplished it. I'm not partial to semantics, I replied. Then, do not leave room for interpretation, Phelan Din shrugged. Or ask more specific questions, Dirthaman added. I shook my head. That was just going to be a pointless, roundabout conversation. I decided that it would be best not to pursue it. Will I be able to call you all, even after you faded? I pushed the conversation along. The others looked at June. It would seem not, Myth-All responded. Once we have been completely absorbed into you, it's likely that you won't be able to call us together anymore. And it would seem the process is growing faster, just as you thought, Solace added. Much faster. If the rate had stayed the same, I should still be solid for a year or so before I began to fade. And, as you guessed, it is probably thanks to my influence, Phelan Din added. The more of me you absorb, the faster we will all fade. So the effect is exponential. I crossed my arms. That means that I probably only have a few months left to speak with you all. Weeks, I'd say, Dirthaman replied. You may not be able to notice, but Phelan Din is already beginning to fade. It seems like this won't be worth much in the end, I sighed. I wouldn't be so sure, Myth-All smiled. I'm sure that you'll find a use for it in time. I would practice calling us while you still can. The practice will do you good. Practice in your sleep and even during the day when you're doing other things. I think you'll find that the results are surprising. I smiled. I'll do that then. Over the next few weeks, as I went about my day, I would use Pantheon to call to the Evanuris. The first time I tried it, I was walking to the assembly chamber with Farron. I was disappointed at first because I didn't think it had worked. I didn't feel any different at all. In fact, I was in the middle of the assembly meeting when the effect registered. Suddenly, I had full recollection of a meeting between myself and the Evanuris. We discussed how I had used Pantheon on the way to the assembly, and about how I was still doing exactly that. While we met, I was also walking with Farron, meeting with Dashirs, and listening to proposals. It seemed that Pantheon allowed my spirit, or my subconscious, to meet and experience things, while my conscious mind continued on normally. Once the Pantheon's effect had ended, I would instantly gain the memories and knowledge of what happened during the discussion. It was an excellent way of gaining knowledge from the Evanuris while I could, and I took full advantage of it. At first, the meetings were short, but the more I used it, the more time I could get in. By the end of the first week, Pantheon lasted an entire day. I prioritized learning from those who would fade fastest. That meant Solace, then Phelan Din, then Dirthaman, then finally Myth-All and Andruil. By the time Myth-All and Andruil faded to the point of unresponsiveness, I had learned a great deal about the original history of the elves, how they would manipulate and control the spirits, their methods of enchanting and weaponsmithing, and even how they came to master their more unique abilities, considered their domains, that they were known for by their descendants. It was a treasure trove of priceless knowledge that I would have to share with Triana and Elfric's people. I was certain they would be eternally grateful. By the time invitations to other kingdoms' leaders and nobility were sent out for my coronation, I had fully integrated the souls of the Evanuris into myself. This integration had some side effects. For instance, just as I could see the stone's movement, where others only ever saw it sitting still, I could see the veil and the spirits and world beyond it. This was something I could channel with focus. I could see it or not at my preference. The Evanuris magic power had combined into my own. and with all 7 of them fused with me now, I could see how all of the Evanuris could kill titans. It genuinely surprised me how potent my magic was, and how deep my power reserves were. I was almost scared of the magical potential I had now. I felt almost invincible. One other use I found for Pantheon was that I could continuously train and research magic in the Fade while I was going about my day. I was no longer restricted to waiting to fall asleep to train my magic. It had only meant to be an experiment after I wondered if it would work, but when the experiment was a success, I began dedicating most every moment afterwards towards this new form of constant practice. One interesting thing I discovered was that I wasn't pulling from my magical reserves when doing this. My spirit seemed to either have its own magical reserves or was pulling directly from the magic of the Fade itself. In the months between the Evanuris fading away and my birthday, I was able to get in nearly a full year's worth of magical practice. This had such extreme potential. When I tried explaining how I felt to Farron after all of these new discoveries, he was kind enough to warn me that feeling that way could make me overconfident. Overconfidence could lead to ruin. Still, it was an amazing feeling. It seemed like all that was left for me was our wedding and my coronation.